Welcome everyone to another webinar by Springworks. Today's topic is candidate-focused background verification, which is a very crucial part of the candidate onboarding experience. We will learn how to get started with it, how to get set up with it, how to carry out your first background verification. And then as you scale the company, and we have two companies here that have scaled like 300% and 400% or so in the past 24 months. So we have the perfect panelists to tell you about how to scale that. And of course, us being the background verification providers, Karthik, CEO of Springworks, I, of course, moderating your webinar as always. We will also be able to tell you, how we go about helping our clients and customers do that. So before we get started, would definitely want our panelists to introduce themselves. Shipra, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thank you so much, Abash, and thanks, Karthik and the Spring Verify team to give me this opportunity to be a part of this discussion. So I manage the people operations function for Niveus Solutions, and we are a GCP or a Google Cloud partner. Currently, we are amongst the top three vendors for Google in India for their GCP migrations. I come with over 70 in multiple fields, and I'm really excited to kind of given my point of view to this discussion that has been organized. While I've given a quick brief about my professional experience, I'm an ardent travel enthusiast from a personal standpoint. I enjoy cooking and definitely try a lot of different kind of cuisines, some inspired from my travel and some otherwise. I'm also somebody who has an entrepreneurial stint and in the hospitality space. So that's a quick brief about myself.
Great, fantastic to hear that. Khushbu?
Thank you, Bharat and Karthik. This was a really good opportunity that I had to grab, and I could not say no to when Yash and Mikami, my managers, reached out to me. A quick introduction. So I come with 3.5 years of experience in HR and admin space. I think I'm a startup person. So right after completing my MBA in 2019 from Christ University, I joined a edtech startup, and I joined Slice like 2 days before COVID hit us. And trust me, the journey has been amazing, where starting with employee experience of just 250 members to scaling the team to 1,800 or so now. It's been a really long journey and very, very hustling and a fruitful one as well. On a personal level, I love I love traveling. Plus, I also love hopping around cafes. So a lot of you might see me in Kormangla hopping cafes over weekends. So that's just a little bit about me. Looking forward to have to learn a lot from the session and also share my knowledge.
Fabulous. So, of course, for the regular folks here, you already know who Karthik is, CEO of Springworks. Just to clarify, our bigger brand is Springworks, right? But the specific topic that we are discussing is background verification, and it so happens that the product that we build for this particular challenge problem is called Spring Verify. So just to help you do a distinction between the two. But Karthik, let's get this conversation started. Can you tell us a little bit about, before we even get into the the aspects of background verification itself, what was like? Tell us the story behind, starting Spring Verify. Like, what was it that led to, Springworks getting into the background verification business?
Sure. Yeah, I think generally background verification has been very, archaic, right? It has been, literally started from a, stage where, people used to print out a form and then actually fill it up, and then, used to courier it, sometimes even send it, scan it and send it, right? Like that's where background verification started, and used to be like, no, we are, investigating employees, we're doing a, we're doing like a, it seemed very negative. Even now we get queries, or we want to, do this without consent of the employee. We want to do this without, like that. We don't want to actually trust, but we don't, just still want to verify everything they have and go above and beyond, actually what is required. So, it was never really candidate focused, very employer focused, very kind of cumbersome to, fill. Would take an hour, 2 hours to even just, fill all the documents and really ask for everything, right? Pretty much every single document you would have with you, right from your 10th, class, you would have to literally give that, right? And now, and then, we were like, okay, no, this needs to change. First, this problem is big enough that almost every company is now looking to do background verification, and we have some clients who started at the, size of 10 employees, right? Because it's almost become a mandatory thing. As soon as you set up a company, some compliance is required, like ISO, SOC 2, whatnot. And sometimes if you're in the, sector of, say, fintech, hospitality, working with, large scale vendors like Google and whatnot, you would require from day one, right? And so it's a big enough need, and it's only increasing with kind of the explosion of new companies in India. And so we like, there is a lot of scope for improvement here. One, from a candidate experience. Second, from an automation, turnaround time experience, right? How can we improve the turnaround time? How can we deliver some, if not the complete report, how can we deliver partial reports, so at least the process can start, does not have to wait for 2 months, 3 months, right? And how can we take as less as, possible information from the candidate, but still deliver, what is required from a compliance perspective, right? So that, that was the, entire reason to kind of, start this, and we started this, I think, end of 2017, early 2018, and took a decent amount of time to actually build the base, right from, okay, what are the different checks which need to happen, what's the bare minimum, how do we set up a form to take all this information, how do we have all the customizations and flexibility that compliance requires, right? And it's not, sometimes we blame the HR, but it's actually not the HR, it's the company, it's the, compliance, it's the security, requirement, to kind of have these type of, checks required and different, for like 5 years of experience, you would want these checks. For 10 years of experience, you would want, something else. For 25 years of experience, you would probably want to do a credit report and things like that, right? So that's where, the entire thesis kind of started. How do we change, and, how background verification is done more from a candidate perspective, and then in that process actually help the employer, the HR, both from a visibility, experience perspective.
Got it. Yeah, that's the starting days of Spring Verify. But now coming to Shipra and Khushbu. Shipra, we will start off with you, and as well as Slice and Niveas. I think they're both in the sort of space where this is sort of a matter of compliance, right? And of course, we will discuss some of the other aspects as well, where it might not be necessarily from a compliance perspective, but for like a fintech and the sort of data security that you have to ensure, this is a matter of compliance. So Shipra, when was the right time for you, or was it from day one that you had to have a background verification process in place? Or if you were part of the system when this was set up, how did you decide that right now is the time to get onboarded with a professional background verification service provider?
So, Abhash, like I said, right, we were a company that grew quite, quickly over a period of last 15 months. And the fact of the matter was, background verification was something that was part of our system in any case, where, there were certain standard checks that was, being done. However, when we decided to, go in for the ISO 27000, certification, that's when we said that, we'll need to have a much more systematic manner in which we will have to, kind of take the background verification process forward. And also the fact that, we were scaling at the rate that we were scaling, we definitely needed help from, third-party vendors like yourself who have partnered with us beautifully to kind of, get the process going quicker, faster, and in a fairly seamless fashion, right? So I think the decision was, to answer your question, we already had a system in place, but how do we streamline it? How can we, kind of take it to the next level in terms of the turnaround times and things like that is when we decided to, kind of partner with Spring Verify and, take things forward.
Got it. And similarly, Khushbu, even at Slice, like you said, you joined literally 2 days before the pandemic, and since then you have grown, 4x, 3x, something like that. And when you onboarded with a background verification, I don't want to keep mentioning Spring Verify. It almost sounds like a pitch. But what were some of the factors that you were looking at, some of the parameters that you were judging these background verification service providers on, like what is like priority number 1, 2, that sort of stuff, right? Like digitization, I understand, at least from all the discussions that we have with customers, is one of the primary reasons, apart from, of course, the compliance aspect itself. So just want your perspective on this, because there might be people in the folks in the attending this webinar who might also be thinking from the same perspective.
So, definitely compliance is something in all our audits we had to, bring in those reports and, say that we've done some sort of verifications, etc. But for Slice, I think it has always been the culture, the sort of people that we bring in. So that matters a lot. So even when we were scaling, or even before that, right, like maybe the initial hiring was from our network, etc. But then when we started scaling massively, culture became one of the perspective, integrity, the values that we wanted to uphold in our team as we were growing became one of the factors that we wanted to ensure our people have in them. And by the matter of fact, like, when you're doing background verification, you get to know these things. You get to know from the market what sort of people we are hiring, not just in terms of the basic checks that we do, like employment verifications or education verifications, etc., but also the sort of values that this person would bring in. So that is something that that's a non-compromisable trait that we wanted to bring in. And I think with Spring Verify and, the partners that we have in place, so we ensure that, we're checking on integrity and other values that our team will not let go of, even if someone is doing really, really well in what they are doing. But those values, something that we thought became a priority for us to check and do background verification. So, yeah.
Got it. One interesting thing that you brought up, which is essentially where people start thinking about it, right? Initially, when you're starting, and I'm again assuming most of us are here from a tech startup sort of a background. Initially, when the founders get started, right, most of the people they hire are from their like immediate circle, or maybe friends of friends, some family friend, that sort of stuff, right? Like people you already know, if not directly, at least like 2 layers deep. And that's where the concept of background verification doesn't really make sense, because I know this person already. But apart from, like I said, for certain industries this is regulated, it is a if you want ISO certification, but essentially for any industry that is working with sensitive data, right? Like this becomes an important. So this is where I would want to bring this question to you, Karthik. According to you, what's the right time for a particular company which is not in one of these industries, right? Where it is maybe not a matter of compliance. At what stage do they start thinking about this, irrespective of that?
Sure. I think, Khushbu answered this actually very well, which is the moment you go beyond hiring from your network, I think that's when you start background verification, right? So you've done your first 15, 20 hires from your own network, and people again either 1 degree or 2nd degree, right? And after that, I think that's the place you should start
Got
background
it.
verification at a official
And what sort of checks do you start off with, right? Like there are a myriad number of checks if someone wants to go really deep, and I'm assuming Khushbu meant that, right? Like they are maybe potentially going to reference checks and all of that as well. That is where you get to know these nitty-gritties, right? But do you start off with like a smaller set of checks, or do you from day one go pretty deep, or is it like a company to company thing? How does this work?
Yeah, actually, Shipra, would be interesting to know, given that you were doing some of the checks yourself, internally before onboarding a partner, right? Like, what were, some of the checks you were doing, before, say, onboarding a partner, and like, and what, I guess, what is the reasoning behind, those checks?
Right. So, integrity was something that, Khushbu touched upon, right? And I think with COVID, what happened was a lot of people who were moonlighting, doing multiple jobs, and, trying to still be on the payroll of not just one company and a couple of other companies. So for us, identification, the identity check was something that was, really critical. As an organization, for us, merit was something that we gave a lot of importance to. So, in terms of education, as long as our employees were able to, crack the interview process, ensured that they were in a position to kind of meet the expectation and parameters and the benchmarks that, we had set internally. In the initial phase, we did not really emphasize that much on educational check, because you could be from one background and you could still be acing at something else, right? So identity checks and reference check was something that we were giving a lot of importance to. And when we spoke about reference check, reference check from the previous managers as well as the HR of the organization was something that we were quite particular about doing it. But a criminal check was something that we were finding it difficult, and it's not that easy. And when you're starting off with your immediate circle of people, it wouldn't really be that important. It's only as you expand and you start hiring from different cities, different backgrounds, all of that. We need to have those checks in place as well, right? Because ultimately, it is the employees that really build the culture and the organization, if I may say so, right? Because the kind of people you bring in are the ones who will define how your work ethics are, how the interactions are, and and ultimately delivery and the value proposition that the organization can bring. So when we started off, we were essentially doing our ID checks and the reference checks to begin with, but as we have grown and as we have moved on, we've added other few multitudes of checks in place to strengthen the entire verification process, so as to ensure that we cover from all ends.
Good that I launched this poll, and I think there is a flaw in how the poll is set up, because you can't. There is no correct answer in this, by the way. And very good to see that no one has selected it's a flaw finding mission, because that's not what a background check is supposed to be. You're not going with the assumption that you are going to find something wrong with this candidate, or you're not trying to gather evidence to support it, which is a great seg. I mean, I love that this mistake has happened with the poll, which is a great seg into the next topic, right? Which is from the perspective of candidate experience, right? We have set the proposition that this is not a flaw finding mission. Like you mentioned, Khushbu, like you mentioned, Shipra, this is much more than that. This, goes to the values, integrity, culture of the company and all of that. But what happens once a red flag comes up? Like, how do you look at a red flag? And this is where both the perspectives have to be kept in mind, right? One is a red flag of course, means you have to take certain actions on it, right? It does not necessarily mean that, as soon as there is a red flag, the conversation is gone, right? Like you cut off with the candidate and all. It's the next set of actions that you have to take. So would love both of your perspectives on what happens when a red flag comes up. How do you go about it? How do you think about it? And maybe it's a great opportunity to just flip the switch and make this about great candidate experience, right? In case this red flag is not really something that you should, I mean, if it's a criminal check sort of a red flag with like, yeah, just trying to would appreciate if everyone is on mute, but yeah, okay. We'll start off with you, Khushbu. What happens when you see a red flag on a candidate's report?
So this happens, like, we get red flags, and trust me, we go through what this red flag means for us. Like, for example, in our scenario, let's take performance, right? Someone did not really do well in their previous organization, and it's a red flag. They do not want to hire this person because of performance issues. But behavioral aspects are in check. Uh, how do you treat this case? It's a red flag that you shouldn't hire. Probably this person might not perform. But since we interviewed, we need to believe in our interview process. We need to believe in what we judged at that hour, and also the sort of environment that we are going to provide this person to perform and excel in our system. So probably it's more of like, even if it's a red flag, it's not like a termination case for me. To put it very, very openly, because we let the manager know this is what had happened in the previous organization, but that doesn't mean the person will not perform well in our organization. So we will keep a check on how this person does in our organization, and is that person able to scale up. But let's say tomorrow there's an integrity issue or a red flag in terms of someone forging a document, even if it's at a level where it's just an executive that we've hired who's let's say 1 year old in the system or has 1 year of experience. That's an integrity question, and does that go well with my culture or the sort of environment that I want to build? If that's a clear no, then it's a red flag for me, and that means I cannot really have this person on board. And that's when we take cases and ensure that the person is, we take a stricter action to let go of this person, or probably see if we can move them to a role where they cannot breach data and all of those things.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah, and like you said, performance being a very subjective matter. It could also be the relationship that this person has with their past manager or HR team or whatever. Shipra, you've encountered any unique cases as such? I mean, it's perfectly fine if you haven't, but just wondering if there have been any stories around this.
So, in with background verification and red cases, I think it's very, very important for us to, use a very balanced approach when you get a red report, right? Because a lot of times, the minute the report is read, it's, alarm bells ringing. But I think it is also important, depending upon the kind of red report, like, Khushbu mentioned, if it's a performance issue, and clearly, right, the environment that you work in also kind of contributes to the way you perform, the way you thrive, right? So it's not necessary that if there's been a performance issue somewhere, you need to have a performance issue in a different environment as well, right? And I think red reports at times can also create a very biased hiring experience, simply because of the fact that, for example, I mean, we had one red report that came, and it was a criminal check, that was showing as red, and this report took some time for the the report to be presented to us, and we decided as a management that we will have a conversation with the employee and check as to why the report, is there any background to it. And when we did so, we realized that there is a malicious intent that happened because of a certain a property dispute that was there. And had we gone prima facie with what the report said and taken action, we would have probably missed out on a very, very good employee who's been performing exceptionally well with the organization. We got a police clearance certificate from him. And we took a conscious call that, we would take that as an exception despite the report. So I think it's extremely important for us to, take a balanced approach, because at times, what you see and what the background to it might be, very different.
Very different.
We similarly had a case where somebody had a speeding ticket. And, the check came as negative. And it was a speeding ticket, right? So I think from a case-to-case basis, from an HR standpoint, from a background verification, a point of contact standpoint, it's important for us to analyze why those reports are read, and take a conscious decision by presenting it to the management with all the backgrounds and facts after having a conversation with the employees, because a lot of these reports at times could be things which are, very, very old cases. There are instances where people have, changed. There's been a long gap that has happened from the time that the instance has occurred and, to where they are at what point in their life at this point when we are doing the checks, right? So it's never a black and white answer. I think we have to be extremely, sensitive to understanding a red report and, taking a decision which could impact a person quite negatively as well. And it's not just the employee, right? It also impacts the stakeholders from an employer standpoint, and, everybody in between, because it's never a nice feeling to take a difficult call that we have to take on the basis of a red report.
Yeah, definitely lead with empathy. And I think, as an aside, might not be very relevant, but that you brought up, if the person has I think I saw somewhere that, Slack and a bunch of other companies based out of the US, of course, they have some sort of a program where they hire previously incarcerated folks, people who have come back into the society after having, completed that. But anyway, that's beyond the point of the discussion. But yeah, just lead with empathy. Karthik, typically, what sort of a loss are we talking about? Because I remember this, there is this career builders survey, and we also write a bunch of blog posts and all of that, which keeps getting quoted again and again, is like, one bad hire, there is a loss of like $17,500, attached to it. If you, ended up hiring someone and then you find out that, oh, this is not the same person, and, so multiple red flags come up. Of course, not the some of this situations that we discussed here. So
Correct.
From that perspective also, but given the fact that we do it for so many companies, what's the typical, like, do we have some percentages? What should people be, why should people care? Because $17,500 is a lot of money. Of course, this is a US number, but I'm saying even equivalent, Indian equivalent would be quite a huge sum of money.
Yeah, and I think so. It's two things. One is, what percentage of people actually, kind of misrepresent, their information on a resume, or on their kind of while applying to a company. And so I think multiple studies say that it's around 10%, so almost like 1 in 8, 10 to 15. It kind of varies across industry, whatnot. So I think that's one, because that kind of sets just say if you like say someone like Slice who's hired 1,600 people in 2 years, so that becomes a big number in that way, right? And so that's the around kind of 10% of people would generally represent one or two things. And then the second thing is what's the loss, right? And I think loss is from multiple aspects, right? One is as Pushpa and kind of Khushbu mentioned, one is loss to the people, to the entire employee culture and the organization, and that's very hard to really quantify, because one, one person who's has done something wrong, or has kind of misrepresented, that kind of sets a very wrong tone, and the intent is not correct then, right? So now that's a non-tangible loss. But then the tangible loss from a business wise is definitely very high, right? And I think it depends on industry to industry, right? If you're especially working with a fintech company, there's a lot which can happen, right? Which is why these credit reports and address checks and those type of checks also come in when you are handling a lot of sensitive information, and there is potential to change a bunch of things and actually do that, right? So same thing would happen on for example, your like for finance, people, so not just fintech companies, but finance, people generally, there's a lot of potential for misuse or errors, right? So I don't really have a clear number, but I think it depends on industry to industry, and can be and it's not thousands of rupees, it's definitely lakhs and crores of rupees, right?
Correct.
And that's where the quantum is. So which is why if right now you see almost every single company is doing background checks beyond a certain size, which is probably 10, 15 people.
Yeah, yeah. Couple of hygiene things before we move ahead to the next part of the discussion, which is about the candidate experience. We are recording this, so you will get a recorded version of this on your email within 4 to 5 hours after the webinar ends. So you will be able to watch, rewatch parts that you want to go back to and such. Of course, the chat is open for questions to the panelists, to Karthik / Spring Verify. If you want to ask any questions around background verification, if you want to ask some perspectives from Shipra, Khushbu that we might have missed out on asking, or we will not be able to ask, feel free to add them in the chat. We will take it up towards the end. And of course, the polls are coming up. By this point, of course, everyone knows the answer. So I'm expecting everyone to select the correct answer for this one. But let's see what the third poll is. Okay, then. Now that we have sorted out, the background check, the importance of a background verification, how do you look at something like a red flag? When do you get started with background verification and such? Let's come to the main sort of crux of what we wanted to hit upon today, which is the candidate experience itself. And it has become that much more important in the past 2.5 years, because employer branding is a big thing now. Every single employee looks at your Glassdoor reviews, right? Maybe is potentially talking to 5 people, 10 people in your company before taking the decision to join. And the fact is, background verification is one of the first experience, apart from, of course, the interview experience, which is the obvious fact. Background verification is one of the first processes or systems. And although as a background verification provider, Spring Verify will be handling it, but at the end of the day, they are not thinking about Spring Verify, right? They are thinking about your company as the one that has initiated the process, right? So that's why the this is one of the first interface that you have in terms of the candidate experience, and that's why it's that much more important. Again, the same career builder survey says 2 out of 5 folks tend to make a negative perception about the company if they encounter a bad background check experience, right? And that makes sense, because it's sort of sensitive topic, as in of course, people who have been in the system understand why a background check is being conducted. But at the end of the day, it's like, that same subconsciously you're thinking, oh, they're trying to find what is wrong with me, or, what are the flaws with my documents and such. So with all that context in mind, Shipra and Khushbu, how do you sort of ensure that this experience, and of course, you might say, oh, Spring Verify will take care of that. But before you, came on board with us, what were some of the things that you had in mind in terms of candidate experience? What was the most important parameter for you from this candidate experience perspective? And if you can also share, some of the experiences with us.
Yeah, and also, how do you kind of, I guess, inform a person, a candidate, right? Because those persons may not have joined, right? Okay, we are going to run a background check on you. Like, do you know, what type of questions do you get? Do people say, why are you doing this? Do you not trust me? Right? Stuff like that. How do you kind of handle those type of situations, and how do you kind of communicate that?
Shall I go first?
Yes, please
Sure.
go ahead.
So I think communication is the key in terms of, helping a candidate understand why a background verification is being done, right? So at Nevius, one of the key aspects that we try and, imbibe is our talent acquisition team has been briefed at the very point of their first contact with the prospect employee, to kind of, tell them very candidly and openly that we do undertake a background verification process. And when we undertake that background verification process, I think some of the key points that we like to highlight is the fact that these prospect employees are our potential employees in the future. And it's really important for us to ensure that, we create a safe working environment. And the points that we mentioned earlier, right, where the culture is something that is extremely important, and we want to maintain a certain, a kind of culture within the organization. And ensuring that, the ethical aspect of it, the integrity aspect of the prospect employees also evaluated, and, that sort of an expectation is set with them, plays a very big role in the acceptance of the background verification process by the employees themselves, right? So for us, in our experience, what we've realized is that when we are upfront with the candidates, when we kind of, set the right expectation as to why we are doing it, it is not something where we are trying to be intrusive or trying to, of course, we are trying to validate the information that's been shared with them, but it is over and beyond that. There is more to it than just that check that we are trying to do, right? There's a lot of underlying aspects which are softer in nature, which cannot be, quantified and, told as to why we are doing this specifically. And it is also somewhere when you're trying to, build the right kind of a work environment for the employees to thrive in, check just validates what you have, understood as part of the interview process on selecting the right candidate. It is also kind of, giving us the assurance once the report comes in that yes, what we have done from a selection process standpoint also is getting validated from a verification when the report is, positive, and it is, green, and it kind of coincides. So it's also a reassurance mechanism for us, right? So predominantly, I think communicating the right information at the very beginning and helping a candidate understand as to why we are doing this verification process is extremely crucial in terms of their acceptance and receptiveness to undergoing the background check. So far, I think we've not really had too much of a challenge. But we have instances where, the candidate, when we have told them that we would be undertaking or running the background verification, the candidate, a couple of instances where the candidates have not pursued the opportunity, and I'm thinking it's for, very obvious reasons. So, that's been our experience so far.
Yeah, if it helps filter that way, then much better.
Yeah, it definitely saves a lot of time and effort and productive hours that we put into the entire process, and then we don't have candidates clearing the background verification. So it certainly helps us from that standpoint.
Got it. Khushbu, what were some of the things from the candidate experience point of view that you were looking for? Well, there is no way to get around it when you onboarded with Spring Verify.
So, Shipra rightly mentioned that, communication and setting the right expectation is the key. But understanding from candidates' perspective on why they don't want to take certain, verifications or these, they don't want to go through a background verification. One of the unique cases that I remember having was a person who was very, very diligent about what would happen with the information that is being provided to Spring Verify? What are they going to do it? What do they do with that data? Is that data sold to someone else? So a lot of questions like that, and that made me review our agreement as well, like, the sort of agreements that you get into, because it's a lot of information that you're giving to a third party. You're trusting that they will utilize it in the right manner. And this is one of the major concerns why people don't want to take a background verification check in the first place. So ensuring and telling them that, the partners that we have, uh, and the sort of checks that they are doing, that what are they going to do about that data, how they are going to treat that data, and privacy is something that would be maintained, is something that we ensure it's there and it's communicated well to the candidates. Second thing is in terms of the consent letters and having this platform where people are sort of able to give in their information by themselves. So it's not me as a HR person who is putting their information right out there with the third party vendor. They have gone through the terms and conditions. They understand what they are signing up for. They understand that entire consent letter part of it, and then give their information willingly uh, to the third party to sort of verify the data. So when that sort of transparency is created on platforms like ours, we happen to have more of acceptance from the candidates to take up verifications, etc., in a more positive light than in a negative manner. So we've not really had experiences where people have said no in terms of doing a background verification or losing out candidates, primarily because it's very, very transparent and they understand the reason and they understand what's happening with their data. So
That's you've brought up a very, very important point. We are talking about compliance and all of that, and it's definitely very important for the background verification provider themselves to be, compliant with all of these things. But Karthik, of course, ISO certification and such are easy ways to figure that out. Data security, how it will, yeah, like you said, we are handling third-party data, but there are also the interesting point that you brought up was this consent letter, right? And of course, things have to be and there will be legalese, right? Because it's a legal document. But how can you make it simple for the end user, right? Like in terms of the user experience or even the user interface, right? So, Karthik, what sort of stuff have we built over time that sort of solves for this problem, right? Like I do know some of the things, like we have done some very, very basic automation, which itself is like 5x or 10x the experience as compared to some of the other providers, right? So is it that the industry itself happens to be in sort of a rut, or is it, what is the problem exactly, and how have we been able to solve it in the past 3-4 years?
Sure, sure. So I think one of the first things when you're like say selecting a provider, and as kind of Khushbu mentioned, obviously is the ISO pen testing, right? Have they done a security pen test recently? How do they handle like documents like Aadhaar, and now the Supreme Court regulations on how you handle like a sensitive document like Aadhaar, which is should not be say should be masked, should not be just saved directly into your system. Like some standard things like that are very important. And sometimes if you work with a provider who don't have all of these regulations, and you will just see it's not masked, it's just stored directly, and that's a big red flag, right? And that's not done, then there's potential for other kind of things happening there. Then so how we have kind of try to improve say consent, right? So online digital consent is one option which is most of our clients kind of currently adopt, right? Earlier there used to be used to literally print out consent forms, attach it to your offer letter, actually where you would kind of get the consent during the offer letter acceptance. Now it's all kind of digital, it's very easy to read. It's not 5 pages, it's literally like a page, and you can read and kind of find quickly kind of consent to that. Digital address verification is one more. Physical address is not easy. I don't know how many calls I receive from a courier company, like, okay, when can I visit? I'm at your doorstep. I'm not able to find your house. Indian addresses are the worst in the entire world, I guess. There's like, whatever. And Kormangla is a perfect example. First block is here, and then you literally get third block. There's no second block in between, and it's just somewhere disappeared. So like first block, second cross, house number 55, and all those random things happen, right? So digital address kind of really solves a lot of it. It's able to kind of take IP address, geolocation, things like that. You are able to do it yourself or send it to your parents or family, whoever is kind of staying at that permanent address, right? And this is very important because a lot of times address checks are run on permanent addresses, and you are actually not there, because you may be living in a different location. And asking your parents to go through this coordination process with a third party person, it's not always ideal, and you can kind of improve a lot of this with just digital address verification. So that's definitely there. Then things like automating your ID check, right? As soon as you upload a document, can we OCR it, take in the details, and run it, so we can kind of get back with a partial report to the HR soon, and also during the form itself, so you don't have to fill in a lot of information. It can be kind of prefetched from the from either the image or from the database, right? So I think those type of things help. And some more things we're working on is insufficiency is a big one. How do you handle checks where you've not received your experience letter? And there was a recent ruling in India where companies have been asked to complete FNF and full and final statement in kind of 2 days, within 2 working days. But companies are notorious for this. People don't sometimes delay experience letter for 2 months, 3 months, whatnot, right? After the last date, right? How do you handle those type of situations? Your mark sheet is not done. That's an insufficiency, right? You want to have reminders, but not too many. You want to be able to upload that reminder easily. So maybe WhatsApp is a way, but again, should not be too intrusive as well, because you're like, oh, WhatsApp, I want to keep my personal professional life, separate, stuff like that. So I think there is a balance needs to be, done, well. And then I think these type of small things is where kind of the impact is there, right? And how do you automate like your employment verification, for example? Right now, a lot of companies, a lot of other providers may be doing it manually, sending out emails. We've tried to kind of use the marketing automation technology for employment verification, right? Which is like a drip campaign type of thing, at a particular schedule, particular timing, based on what days work well, what time works well across the industry, and that generally gives good results. But sometimes you would have to do calls, and if the person is not responding, the HR in the previous company is not responding, things like that. If the company itself has shut down, right, the HR is on a long leave, right? That happens in a company of say 30, whatever, 50 employees, where there's only one HR and there's no one else to kind of handle the employment verification, right? Yeah, so I think each of these checks can be, there's so much depth here, there's so much time to be spent on each of these checks to optimize, and I think it's a constant work in progress. And sometimes it just starts with listening, right? Like, can we actually proactively take feedback from each person who's filling up the form, and use that feedback kind of to improve the process? And not everything is possible, but definitely a lot is possible, right? I think so. We have like a 5-star rating at the end of each form, right? That itself gives us like an indicator. Are we trending in the right direction? What are the current roadblocks? What can we improve on, right? So kind of helps us dictate our product roadmap.
Again, a reminder that you can ask your questions here, so that we can take it up in another 10 minutes or so before we finish off our conversation. Yeah, so the ongoing poll currently is, how much time does it currently take to complete a candidate verification in your organization? Let us see the responses here. Okay, so 42%. Okay, let me share the result. 42% of the attendees say 7 days. 42% say 7 to 15 days, 15 to 30 days. Does that seem right? Karthik?
Yeah. I think education is the one which is the notorious one, and the last 2 years have been very hard. Some universities have been literally shut down, so sometimes it can take a lot more. But I would say actually, less than 7 days should be for most,
Most of the
checks, right?
checks, except
Right. So,
education. Yeah.
and
So
education is the
Shipra,
hard one. Yeah.
how, like if a candidate is joining on say October 1st, when do you initiate the background verification process?
So previously we used to start the background verification process a little in advance, but there has been with the change in the industry trends and everything, the dropout ratio is also on the rise, right? So we've taken a conscious call to initiate the background verification on the day the employee joins.
So that means other than education, most of the other checks should be done within a week or so. Is that the same case with you as well, Khushbu?
So, we initiate our background verification on day one, but there's certain teams for whom we do it prior. Uh, so these are like crucial roles for us, and we would want to start them prior. And the dropout ratio here, even if it's higher, it's okay because the sort of talent that we want, generally in cases where we are hiring in bulk, right? So the interview process must have happened very, very fast. And just to ensure, even before we onboard people, that we are onboarding the right set of people, we start their background verification like a week before. But for other teams, we start it on day one.
And what does this background verification process look like in terms of the checks that you run, Shipra, for someone like a fresher maybe, or someone with a very less experience, as opposed to say someone with like a 5 years or 10 years of experience? Does it vary? Is it the same? Does this mean more reference checks? What does that look like?
So for freshers, it's slightly, it's fairly straightforward because they don't have an employment check, right? Education check, like Karthik pointed out, it's been a little trying because there's been a delay from multiple universities. But we've not mandated an education check. For us, it is, it's really crucial for us to ensure that our interview process is something that, they clear with flying colors. So as long as that's the case, our emphasis is not as much on the educational background of the employee. But for freshers, but for laterals, we do have multiple levels of reference check and the 5-point mandatory checks that we undertake. That's what we do.
Got it. And in your case, Khushbu, does that look similar?
It looks similar. It's just that for certain roles, we've also started doing credit and bureau checks. This is something which we have just started initiating the conversations as well. Because
Why is that important? Tell us why that is important.
So credit and bureau checks that we have brought in, basically we are in a business, it's a financial services that we have. The sort of people that we are hiring, let's say I'm hiring someone in a KYC team or a collections team. If they themselves do not have a good credit score, how are they going to convince the customer to sort of have a better, how are they going to play their role basically, right? So you yourself are a defaulter of XYZ organization, but here you're playing the opposite role, which is pretty different from what you are hired for. You don't believe in those values, but you're sort of pushing customers. So just for these sort of roles, we feel that it's really important that we're hiring the right set of people. Again, it comes to that cultural and integrity part where these roles demand for those, and hence we have this. This is again something which is in pipeline, and we've not gone live with this, but we will be going live with this. And the reason behind this is to ensure that there's a role fitment in this check as well. So
that makes a lot of sense, actually. Credit worthy individual and such that we now think about. Karthik, what are the bare minimum checks that a company should be doing once they are just getting started? And of course, the industries define it. Let's say the let's take the example of industries where this is a compliance requirement versus
Sure.
where this is not.
Yeah. So ID, quote, last two employments, right? So the most recent two employments, and then the most recent education, the highest education, and then finally the address verification, right? So digital address verification. So I think these are the standard checks which most kind of companies do, and on top of it, as Khushbu mentioned, is credit check. You can do a reference check. You can kind of, for experienced people, go beyond two employments, right? So some people would say go to the, like, US is generally last 7 years, right? To do like a last 7-year employment check, and also a last 7-year address check, right? So companies in the US would go as far as last 7, because that's what is kind of mandated, and that's what the maximum you can do from a legal perspective, right? So right now, most companies here would do current and permanent address. Most shouldn't actually do permanent, but current is also an optional thing. And then last 7 would be all the addresses you've stayed in the last kind of 7 years, right? Or and then if and when you change your address during the employment, so that can also be a new one, right? Especially in fintech, if you're handling sensitive data, or if you're handling finance, your current address is equally important. If you have information which you're kind of taking to your home, have access to it, that's an important one as well.
Got it. Let's ask the attendees as well. How many of you here run reference checks? And of course, we are not talking about freshers here, because that would potentially doesn't make any sense. Do you run reference checks at your organization for, say, people with 3-5+ years of experience? Let us see about that as well. Now, given the fact that reference checks can be subjective, and we did touch upon it initially, how many do you run? Does that depend on the number of years of experience, the seniority of the role? What does that look like for you, Shipra and Khushbu? Let's just
either you
take
do
the
it
example
internally, externally, however you do it. I think, but like generally, like, do you do one from each of the previous employments? You do maybe 2 from the most recent?
So we do last two and slides. So that's the most relevant ones because before that, it becomes a little redundant, because we must have hired based on the skills that they would bring in from or the experience that they carry from last 1 or 2 organizations. So
got it.
So even at Navius, it's the last 2 employments that we normally do a check.
Got it.
Makes sense.
I think,
I think the
yes,
other
please,
check which is now becoming increasingly common is the global database, right? So as people move across countries, because criminal check is still kind of limited to India, so doing like a global database allows you to pull into the international databases as well. So I think that's slowly becoming more and more common as you hire people who have been in other countries, may have worked there, may have lived there, stuff like that. I think that's also depends on the kind of company industry as well. But generally, people with higher experience is where you would want to do this, because the potential to go wrong is obviously a lot more there.
Got it. I think we have a hand raised from Manjeet. Manjeet, can you do you want to ask a question? Because we see your hand is raised, but looks like you're not connected to the audio.
Yeah, you can type in if you would like.
Okay, probably that's a mistake. Cool. Yeah, so we are open to questions now. I think we have covered everything that we wanted to cover. I think reference check is what can be replaced with PGV, because reference checks can be preference specific from candidate statements or reference HR as from HR. Okay, I think what Rajesh means to say is, if I'm getting it right, is ask for reference check from the previous previous company's HR team / people ops team rather than the managers. Is that what you mean, Rajesh? Not sure about that. Cool. Let's see, Ajit. Yes,
I
that's
think
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, reference check is basically, one is like a employment verification, right?
Correct.
Did you work at this company with this designation? Are you eligible for rehire, sometimes salary and things like that, right? So basically verifying what you've kind of mentioned on your resume. And then the second aspect is the more cultural aspect, right? Asking the manager, asking the peers you worked with, how is it working with this person? Was he or she a good team player? How was the communication? Did work generally get done and things like that, right? I think that's kind of a more I guess a soft reference check, which is not based on facts, but kind of more information. And sometimes the HR team does that themselves, but you could also kind of work on outsourcing with filling up a form and things like that, right? So there is there's definitely value in doing it yourself, and sometimes even the TA team, talent acquisition team, would go ahead and do that. But there's definitely value in kind of asking people to fill up a form so you can kind of get a first level, and then if you want to do a deeper one, you would probably have the TA team or the HR team kind of do that. So I think it really depends from kind of the person you're hiring. Senior people, you would 100% most likely want to do a reference check.
Yeah, yeah. I think this Ajit has a good question. In 2022, proof of work versus degree, right? Like that's essentially the question. So his question is, what could be the thinking behind doing education checks for even experienced candidates, right? Uh, do you think there will be more focus on the proof of work, which is reference check is, I guess, one small part of that as well, because you're sort of asking their previous manager or whatever, what sort of work they did. But then there are myriad ways today to showcase the work that you did, right? At your last company, your last organization and such. So yeah, I think this is beyond just background verification. I think this is a bigger question of, do you think we are moving away from, degrees to proof of work? And yeah, your personal opinion again on this, Shipra. I mean, just clarifying that you're not talking on behalf of your organization, but your personal opinion on this, Shipra and Khushbu.
So, I think I stated this earlier as well, right? Where in our organization, this is something that's, I think pretty much in practice, because proof of work is what we kind of give precedence over education. So education check is not a mandate for us. And I think personally, I'm strongly of the opinion that, degrees and the bookish knowledge can take you only so far, right? Ultimately, all those degrees really wouldn't make much sense if you're not able to kind of translate it into showing what you are capable of doing. So I am very much an advocate of somebody being very practical, very result oriented, rather than just being somebody who can just accumulate multiple things from an educational standpoint.
Got it. Khushbu, your stance?
So I agree with Chipra. So at Slice as well, we do education checks only for freshers, and even for lateral people, it's more of like validating what they have said in their resume. But it's never a red flag in case someone has not had the right education. It's so even in our interview process, right? Like we do not really give weightage to which college or what sort of degree does this person have. If they're able to crack the interview with the knowledge that they have, then that's when they are hired. So that plays an important role for us as well.
100%. Good to see that we are in agreement here as well. We will come back to this. This is an interesting one. How can moonlighting be verified? And there are layers to this question, although it's like a 5-word question, but we'll come back to that. First, some straightforward questions. Would like to know from panel, after onboarding candidate didn't pass previous employment verification, what will be the next process in this situation? So Khushbu, you want to take it?
Yeah. Didn't pass the previous employment verification. Now, again, it depends on whether this person has forged the document, did not complete the offboarding, with the previous organization, or did not serve the notice period, or had performance issues. So it could be categorized in various ways, and based on that, you need to take a call. So let's say if the employment verification, if the document has been forged and all of that, and if that's the culture that you do not want to build, it's not aligned with your values, you will take a hard call. However, if it's on the person not doing their job well in the previous organization, then again it's a call that your organization can take, whether you will be able to give them an environment where they can sort of do well. So you can take a call based on that.
Got it. Makes sense. So it essentially boils down to a question of integrity then, right?
Right.
Like there might be several reasons why that's not the case. Cool. How is a fake company identified with a fake experience? Karthik, you want to take this?
Sure. So now fake company is a company which is in India not registered with the MCA, right? So that can easily be verified with the kind of the company name, the company ID, and so that can be something which you can, and then anyone can look up, or you can work with a partner to kind of actually verify that as well. So, and if obviously the company itself is fake, then the experience is fake, and that's
Correct.
that's a clear red flag to let go that person and
Correct.
terminate that person.
Yeah. And I think the other question also, I think you are the most well placed to answer. How common is a drug test as part of BGV in ITES sector, so tech?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty uncommon, but I think sometimes it's done for senior roles. Again, where there is a potential for misuse, right? If you're hiring a CX or a VP who's managing a team of 100 plus 200 people, the person has some previous substance use, or some current substance use, and the potential there is pretty large, right, in terms of affecting the entire culture, managing the team, so whatnot. So generally you would do for very senior roles and not junior in the IT sector. But hospitality, I think it's pretty common. Customer facing roles, in-person customer facing roles and stuff like that. But I'm not sure if Shipra and Khushbu, if you have different opinions on this.
It's very uncommon.
Yeah, same here. I think there was a point in time when the drug test was something that was mandated by a lot of ITES companies, because the shift working and customer facing roles, all of that, right? But I don't think so. That's something that's really asked for in the current scenario.
Yeah. So let's come back to the bigger question here, and maybe we don't go into the concept itself, but how can moonlighting be verified? I mean, it's a separate discussion whether moonlighting good, bad, evil. We will not get into that. But Shipra, I think you mentioned, if I'm not wrong, at the beginning that you also want to sort of verify that.
So I think it's a very, very tricky space,
yeah.
To even check, right? Because until and unless you have clear indicators of it, it's difficult to verify. But one thing is there for sure. With the behavioral trend of the employee, within a short period of time, you would be in a position to assess if there is a possibility of moonlighting happening, but you cannot tell for sure or with certainty that there is definitely something like that happening. So I think normally what happens is from a verification standpoint, while it's difficult to do, from the other disciplinary action standpoint, you can evaluate the performance, gauge it, put the person on a performance improvement. And if you still see the trend happening, then, you'll need to take a call, conscious call on how do you want to, pursue, because it's not very easy to, maintain multiple jobs, leave alone one, right? So, handling 2 jobs and, being extremely good at it is a rare occurrence.
Got it. So there is a follow-up question to that from Rima Karthik that, there is a legit company, it seems, with a legit website, but they are providing fake experience certificate to candidates. In such case, how can the verification be done?
Yeah. So before that, on the moonlighting. So
Yeah.
actually, some companies. So if you are working for, say, 2 companies, 3 companies at the same time, you could, in principle, check through PF if all of the companies are actually doing PF, right? Which is also a big question mark, because some would not isn't pay the person but pay to one of the relatives and things like that. But if there is PF happening, if you have not disclosed to any of these companies that you are actually moonlighting or freelancing, and you've told all of them, which is where the integrity issue comes up, right?
Correct.
Like you are actually telling all 3 people, I'm working for all 3 of you as full-time employee, and I'm not working anywhere else, and whatever it is, you've signed the contract legally binding you to this employment contract as well. So then, in your PF statement would actually reflect all 3 of them depositing, in your account, which is a labor law requirement in India. So that would be one way to, know what's happening, which can be done through a UN type of verification. Now coming on to the question for, Rima, I think, how do you verify how do you, I guess, verify if the company itself is, as part of the scheme, and giving a fake experience certificate, which people do that for universities and companies. There is actually a list of universities by UGC, which is the authority in India, which are like fake universities, which give a where you can literally buy a degree. I think for companies, it's the I don't know if there's any list like this, but you would probably find that out through your interview or a reference check. If the company is legit, they have a CIN number and things like that, and then I think the only true way of really finding out is through a reference check, and finding out what the work they have done and validating that with the HR and the different people they are who are at the company, stuff like that. Yeah, but unfortunately there are
Yeah, but it's a tough one.
cases.
Essentially, it's a tough one.
Yes, yeah, it's a very
Yeah.
tough one.
Because first off, you have to get that red flag to then make the even take the necessary actions to figure out if this is legit, right? Like, what
Correct,
if you don't
correct.
even figure it out at the first place? And possibly once you've figured it out, a simple Google search should throw that name up. But the
True,
problem
true.
in the first place is, how do you even know, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Sometimes a reference check. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
No, sorry. What I was trying to say is that I think here the company is legit. It is the intent of the respective employee or the HR person that's questionable, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
it's very difficult to kind of
when the business
pull
plan
up
of the
people for.
business plan of the company itself is to be a fake business, then you can't. Yeah, cool. I think we have one question which is sort of wouldn't call it a thought experiment, but what is panel's thoughts on active crime monitoring, right? So you of course do maybe one-time court record check, but is there value in sort of a subscription wherein this company checks every, say, quarter or so whether there is any active crime record coming up for this person? Just as a something to think about, right? So your thoughts on that, Khushbu?
So actively checking. So when you're actually hiring people, it's not because you would want to keep checking whether they're doing something wrong. Uh, I mean, it's just a one-time exercise that you do, and you do not doubt your people until unless there is uh, substantial proof of otherwise, right? Like, if until unless someone hasn't really shown that sort of behavior or something is not impacting the work atmosphere, you wouldn't want to keep doubting. Imagine the morale of these people when they know that every quarter I'm going to have this particular test being run through me. That's more than performance appraisals. We do performance appraisals twice a year, and here I'm continuously checking on someone's crime aspects. uh, that's building a very hostile work environment where people do not trust each other. So I really doubt if that's something that you would want to keep doing this. But yes, if let's say you come across some instance which proves that this is something that this person has done, and obviously you do not want that to be mirrored in the workspace as well, and then you do these checks, it would make more sense to otherwise I think we are uh, more of a culture where we should trust people and then move ahead.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah,
Fair
and I
point.
think,
Yes, please.
just to add to what Khushbu said, right? The intent of the background verification is not necessarily to continuously monitor
Correct.
an employee. But having said that, if there are specific industries which requires that, the employee needs to have a clean record, I think for those industries, it would make sense. But, that's a very, very minuscule percentage
Correct.
of the population. But active checks is something that I'm completely in sync with Khushbu's thoughts, where, the morale of the employee definitely is something that gets impacted, because you're constantly telling that, I don't really trust you as much, and I want to continuously, be doing these checks on you. But the only caveat to it would be, the kind of industry or the kind of customers that they're working with. And if that's something that's mandated as per the industry or the customer requirement, then maybe that's something that can be done with the very, very clear, communication going out to the employee that it is happening because of this very reason.
Because of this reason. Makes sense. That makes
Right.
a lot of sense. I think there is a question here which is sort of philosophical and which we have sort of already answered. But just to take it up again from GXF, what can employers do to allay fears that candidates have about the hiring process, to the point where they feel they need to fake their credentials instead of being fully transparent? So I think we have picked this up in several different as answers to several different questions. But yeah, I think this is a good question to sort of end this webinar on. Yeah, Shipra?
I think, being transparent and honest is the key aspect. Over communication will always help, and reassuring the employees that if there is anything that they fear, or if there is anything that they have a reservation about, they can talk to us and help have that clarified. And going to the extent of faking something is going to be more detrimental than helping them, in any way, right? So I think for me, it is what I said just now that really would help. And there could always be outliers to the case, and there's nothing like a one-fit solution for all, right? So you'll have to kind of maneuver it as you progress and have that conversation with the employee and understand the root cause of where the fear really stems from.
Correct. I think, Khushbu, you have already mentioned this, multiple times. Integrity is what you're essentially trying to sort of check with this, right? But I think it's also a fact of the matter is on the panel, Nevius, Slice, Springworks, we are all new age companies. So we are at least willing to have a conversation. We are at least, willing to sit on a table and discuss this. I think this stems from the fact that, we are like living in our own bubbles of this tech world, right? Where we at least talk to the candidates or at least give them a chance to explain. But there are still, the majority of the policies that the companies have are probably, just, red flag out of the equation, right? So that's also one of the reasons why this is potentially happening. Oh, I think we have a question from Nikita. I was hoping to share a query. In case of posh cases, the decisions are confidential. And in case of termination of a person, he can thereafter join another place. How can we keep a check who have been repeat offenders? At the same time, giving people, oh my God, this is a really tough one. But I mean, it's a great question. So the question is essentially, posh cases, decisions are confidential, but they are terminated. But the only way to know would be, I don't know, can you ask someone during their reference check? Or is it like confidential, Karthik? Yes.
I think if the decision is made against the offender, then you actually have to, there is a requirement to
Disclose? Okay.
no, not disclose, actually file a legal case as well, because that's from the company to say that, okay, now we have found through internal processes and recommendations, and now we're going to refer it to say to the cops and to the police, right? And that
Got it.
should come up
So
in a
only if it
yeah.
goes to that stage, is there a possibility of even finding out?
Correct.
So
correct.
in Posh, I think, the premise is that, it's a reformatory process. So because the premise is that it's a reformatory process, and this also brings me to the earlier point, right,
Correct.
where people could have changed. And
Correct.
normally when it comes to Posh, the assumption is that people would change because of the action that's been taken against them, or the warning that's been given to them. But it's, it's a very valid question when, somebody asks if, if they join another company and there's a repeat offense that happens, right?
Exactly.
So the only way to curb it is if there is a formal legal complaint that's been filed, or an FIR that has been filed. It's only then that, organizations can be mandated to, share information on that. Otherwise, I think the act itself, puts that restriction on that information not being public.
Also,
Yeah, so it
another,
is. Yes, sorry, Khushbu, please go ahead.
just another way of putting this across to the next employer is there are generally questions asked on performance and then behavior. So regardless of saying it was a Posh case, they generally mention was not compliant on the behavioral aspects. And that itself gives a giveaway to the person that there was something wrong with the integrity of the person, and you don't really have to disclose the case as such, and still pass on that information to the next person, and they can then question this person on why this was something which has come as a red flag in your report, and then take it ahead based on their
Got it.
processes that they have. But that's a simple way out. But yes, we cannot really
Got it.
upfront go ahead and disclose Posh cases.
So it's essentially not foolproof. Okay, so this is something new that I learned today. Yeah, but seems like a tricky situation if it has not gone to court, or if like a FIR hasn't been filed. Cool. I think we are at the end of the webinar. I think we have answered all the questions. Shweta, you can let me know in the chat if we have. I think we have covered everything. Yes, we have. But yeah, great to see, some really pointed questions as well, and some, layered questions as well. But I think we covered everything very, very well. Just before we end this, yes, thank you, Shweta. Just before we end this, for everyone attending, we have, like I said, Spring Verify, we are a background verification service provider. And for the attendees of this webinar, we have a special offer. And let me quickly share. It's just 2 slides. We will not go through any slide presentation as such, but because we wanted to make a nice presentation. So yeah, that's us. That's via Spring Verify. Traditional background verification, like we discussed, Karthik said in the very first answer, this was particularly the reason why we went into this industry to solve for this. It's time consuming, the price is high, ops heavy, subpar candidate experience, and that's why candidate experience is something that we focus a lot on, especially because we are ourselves one of those companies that for us employee experience is of the paramount importance. So in everything that we do, that's like the first parameter that we try to solve for. So yeah, that's us. That's how the process works, but you don't need to worry about it. I'm hopefully, with the experience of Shipra and Khushbu, that, every once in a while they spoke about their experience with Spring Verify. Hopefully that's good. You can check us out, testimonials, case studies and such. But for everyone, and like we also discussed some of these features in terms of the user experience, but for all of the attendees here today, we are giving you 5 free checks to get started off with. So of course, this is for companies that are just getting started with, setting up their background verification process in place, or, they are not happy with maybe their current background verification provider. Of course, we will send out an email right after this with the recording. And of course, Khushbu and Shipra, we will also share your LinkedIn profiles if, attendees want to reach out to you for any questions, not just around, background verification, but given that, both of you are experienced people ops professionals, happy to, if attendees want to, they can reach out to you on LinkedIn. We have, by the way, shared this form here as well. If you would like to sign up for a demo and avail the offer, the form is in the chat here. But of course, we will also, share it in the email. So the form will be in the email as well. So yeah, that's it. That's it for the webinar today. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Shipra. Thank you, Khushbu, so much for giving us your precious time. And yeah, like I said, you will all receive anyone who registered who maybe couldn't attend. I saw a few people came in at the last minute and also asked questions, so that's also good to see. But you will get your recording and all the other information in your email by 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. today. Thanks so much again, everyone. And that's it for the recording also.
Thank you so much for the
Thank
opportunity.